And welcome, Hoosier Nation, to our 151st episode of the Hoosier Sound, where we are the official podcast of Indiana HQ. Our mission and goal is simple. We want to bring in-depth analysis and coverage, and a little bit of fun, for Indiana University sports to as many fans as possible across a multitude of modern platforms. We are recording this edition of the Hoosier Sound on July 21st, 2020, where I'm your host, Nathan Christian, and here with me tonight, I'm excited to introduce a new co-host to the Hoosier Sound podcast. We had a little bit of craziness in the background tonight, but I'm glad to be joined by Munster High School legend, John Savilo. John, how are you doing in the middle of this pandemic? Things are crazy right now, but hey, we've got some IU sports to talk about. Welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
We're pretty good over here. It's an honor to be on with one of my best friends going back many years, decades even now. And I'm a huge fan of this organization.
It's great to hear. I mean, look, let's dive right in. You know, there's been some fun and interesting IU sports news over the last few days or so. The first one, not the best. It was announced late last week that 6 IU football players had tested positive for COVID-19. And that was after sort of this initial round of tests, which was extremely encouraging. No IU football players or staff had tested positive for the virus. But, you know, as you've seen with the pandemic, things are very fluid. They change frequently. John, let me just ask you, because you haven't offered your opinion on this show yet as a first-time co-host. I mean, what's your outlook on the possibility of college football this fall? I'm not saying that, you know, a few positive tests is a be-all, end-all, but what are your thoughts as we are a little bit over a month before the scheduled start of the season?
Yeah, I mean, I like the things that the Big Ten has done as a leader. Consistently, you know, the Big Ten has been a leader among the conferences, and cutting the schedule probably does help a lot. I hope that they enforce frankly, just bans in the stadium, as much as it sucks that you don't get to go in person. Like, if you want football at all, we need to endorse and enforce that. I got to say, like, I'm a little skeptical because of the scope of a football team with the rosters being so big. But I do think that if the colleges are doing their job, like, it can be possible. Hopefully that they'll be able to access testing in a way that allows them to ensure every week that the players are safe to play and not a danger to each other.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. And just last week, Noah and Andrew had a really good podcast episode about the conference-only football schedule that the Big Ten led the way on. The Pac-12 followed. I haven't checked to see if any other Power 5 conferences copied that, but you know, it cuts down the travel. I know some people saying the Big Ten, you know, there's still Rutgers and Nebraska and whatnot, but you know, conference-only schedule definitely the plan right now going forward. There was some basketball news yesterday that came down. It was the first day of workouts, voluntary workouts for the basketball program. Coaches and players were involved. It was actually the first day college basketball programs were permitted to practice. So Archie Miller and the gang are out on the court and trying to push forward here as if the season will start on time in November. Other football news: Whop Phillier, Peyton Hendershot, and Stevie Scott were all named to preseason award watch lists. It's not like every player. Some people joke about it. It's not like every player gets nominated to these. Whop Phillier to the Biletnikoff, for example. It's a pretty notable accomplishment when an Indiana University football player gets that recognition in the preseason. The last news update: it's an NBA update. Pacers guard Victor Oladipo, former All-Star, seems to be on track. Initially, he had said, well, I think I'm going to opt out of the NBA restart. But, you know, in the last week or two, he's had a change of mind and he's practicing with the he seems to be on track to play. And, well, John, I'm going to ask you the same question about the NBA as I did about college football. It's a more controlled environment. Everyone's in the bubble right now. You're seeing Instagram stories left, right, and center about the food and the hotel accommodations there. What are your thoughts on the NBA restart first overall, and then are the Pacers a sleeper if Victor Oladipo does actually suit up for them in this postseason?
Well, you know, he did put a hurt on Ohio State at least a couple times. So, you never can keep on him. I mean, like, as a huge NBA basketball fan, I've been pining for the playoffs to come back since they canceled. That said, it's unfortunate that Florida is like leading the way, so to speak, with respect to the expansion in cases in COVID. I think the NBA had done a pretty good job in considering, like, I love Disney World as well, and you can get pretty siloed there if you block off half of the entire thing. I'm sure the players are all going crazy sitting in small hotel rooms, but I mean, like, I applaud how hard they're working towards it. I applaud Adam Silver and, frankly, the Players Association for both allowing people to opt out, as well as the players that are like going for it, how hard they're working to ensure that they're doing what they need to in social distance, with the exception of apparently Dwight Howard, who like
he's the anti-masked
yeah, maybe they need to kick him out. Like, the Lakers don't need him anyways. So I mean, I think one thing on the point of the comparison, like, it's one thing to say that like multi-million-dollar basketball players can choose to compete for the championship, and count me on the side that, like, if you win, there's no asterisks on this title. This is like the Hunger Games championship. Yeah. So all of the Jordan fans, if LeBron wins the title, like, I'm sorry, it definitely counts. It might count for 2. But with respect to like the NCAA, it would be a very classy and appropriate move, I think, for the NCAA to guarantee healthcare coverage for some amount of time if they're going to keep the players playing, given the kind of revenue stream that matters for those universities. Yeah. And like, I want the NBA to happen. Frankly, I want NCAA football to happen. I hope that we can do it safely. With respect to the Pacers, I've been thinking for a while, and I don't know where I landed on this. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. But like, do you think that it is advantageous for these teams to have younger players who don't have such routines, and then they can like rebound, theoretically, their physical attributes can rebound quicker off of a delay in the season, or a team like the Rockets or the Lakers, where they have a lot of old guys who have gyms in their basements and can practice all the time?
Yeah, it's almost a case-by-case basis, with the Pacers specifically. I've got to think it's an advantage. I think of guys like Malcolm Brogdon, who is recovering himself from getting the coronavirus. I look at him. I look at TJ Warren, who's a little bit older, but he doesn't have that much tread on his tires. Aaron Holiday too. It's going to be interesting if Oladipo can play. I think, given his level of conditioning too, he's known as one of the most athletic players in the NBA. That should definitely help their cause. I'm trying to think of another team off the top of my head that people might consider to be a young basketball team. Maybe someone like Memphis out west. I think they might be at a little bit of a disadvantage. I think they're going to be kind of hyped up on the adrenaline. I think they've got so much inexperience that any sort of marginal benefit they gain from being able to bounce back a little bit quicker gets nullified by the coaching mismatch or the talent disadvantage that they have. I mean, are you on the same thought process as that, or do you think those younger teams do have a big leg up?
So I think in the early part, like getting back in, I think it is going to be an open question that, like, you could see some surprises. It wouldn't surprise me to see surprises, right?
Yeah.
But I think as long as it goes on, the consensus, at least with Vegas and like the betting markets and the prediction markets, have all put the Lakers higher, and they have a really old team. Their team is obviously very segmented, with LeBron and AD as very elite players, but then the next best player is probably Danny Green. It looks like Rondo won't play. Doesn't matter, like, one way or the other. I think that people think over time, and just how uncertain and weird this is, that like the players who have the experience to know how to like really win the playoff games are gonna get through it. Like I mentioned it as the Hunger Games. I honestly do think that, like, if you made me gamble, I think the Lakers, the Clippers, and the Rockets have a huge advantage, and then in the East, the Bucks, just because they've been through it enough.
Yeah.
probably the Raptors, and in a way that maybe like the Pacers playing the Celtics, I could go either way on.
Yeah.
I think that the Pacers have a chance because they have a lot of talent, and having so many, like a thick middle, if you will, where they have a good 7-man rotation could play out well. But I do think the older teams that have experienced the ups and downs are probably a little bit better bet the longer we go in it.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing if there are any upsets. I mean, we didn't get the NCAA tournament this year, so I'm looking forward to seeing if we can get anyone tripped up early. But
I can imagine that we're going to get like probably 2 to 4 upsets in the first round.
Sign me up. I love it. As we talk about the NBA, I wanted to dive into who won the week this past week in IU sports. And hey, look, we were on the NBA topic earlier. In fact, just now we wrapped that up. Wizards center Thomas Bryant, Washington, another young team that's entering this NBA bubble here in Orlando. Thomas Bryant tested positive for coronavirus a little bit over a week ago. The good news is he's back, and he told the Washington Wizards reporters over the course of the last few days that he's put it behind him. He's got his full focus on basketball now, and that's encouraging to see. Some photos came out with him dressed not dressed, but wearing a very stylish mask, trying to spread the message of, hey, if that's all you got to do to prevent getting the virus, then go ahead and do it. So Thomas Bryant won the week this past week after overcoming COVID-19. But this is what all of you have been waiting for, all right? We've gotten past our IU news updates. We've gotten through who's won the week. It's time to play a little Would You Rather. And for those of you who may be unfamiliar with the rules, it's kind of self-explanatory. We're going to give each other a couple of options here for a handful of IU basketball questions and IU football questions. And, whether you're listening to this in the car or on a walk outside or at home or whatever, feel free to let us know what your thoughts are. Either drop them in the chat or send us a tweet or a Facebook message. We read all of them. So let's start with some IU basketball Would You Rather questions. And we're starting with the grand salami of them all, okay? You, John, I know you followed IU basketball for quite some time. Right now, I'm going to put a little bit of a caveat on this. We're referring to the basketball team that's going to take the floor next year for Indiana. So not just some sort of hypothetical generalization. We're talking about, hey, for the roster that Indiana has next year, would you rather have Archie Miller coach this basketball team or Tom Crean? Straightforward, hard hitter. John, who you got?
So I like the wrinkle that you put in at the end.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge it tilts the question a lot. And the reason why I believe that is the case is that everyone understands the longer that you follow Indiana basketball that Tom Crean's biggest challenge and his like hole, if you will, and the flaw is that X's and O's in game not very strong. And in general, very high octane offenses, elite even, right? Consistently top 10 in the nation, even not adjusted for conferences. But the defense is a little questionable. And, the X's and O's, not the best, to say the least. And so it would probably be intellectually validating to say Archie Miller is more likely to coach this team because he built it. And he has like the defensive mindset and the experience there where he seems to be a better X's and O's coach. But I think I'm still going to lean on Crean. I think the big reason why I would give that as a justification is like when you look at the timeline that Crean was on and the experience he had here, frankly, the experience at Marquette as well, but that's a little bit less relevant in my opinion, is that he took a lot of guys who were, okay talents and made them better. I think when you think about his tenure, you can point out a lot of guys that got to the NBA and even had success in the NBA. Like you just mentioned Thomas Bryant. I think Thomas Bryant was not as him being a good NBA player and signing for a decent contract was not maybe the median outcome when he, committed to Indiana. And frankly, I don't think Archie Miller has had that much success. It is early in his tenure, but you can't really point out the kind of guys who overachieved to the point where they're in the NBA and thriving. Whereas I think Tom Crean, despite his inefficiencies and flaws in the actual like game to game, quarter to quarter, when you call the timeout or what play you're drawing up, his players consistently outperformed in a way that I think behooves the team overall.
Yeah, and in fact, I was just thinking of something else too. One of Crean's weaknesses at the end of his time at IU was he was really struggling to recruit the state of Indiana. And all of a sudden, you look at the roster that IU's got. Well, Archie Miller landed all those guys from the state of Indiana, so Tom Crean doesn't have to worry about that. He can just worry about the development and the execution part. With that said, though, I'm still going to lean Archie on this one, simply because it's his team, it's his roster, it's his system. And you could have months long stretches of podcast episodes where you debate the validation, the success of Archie Miller's systems. But at the end of the day, almost everyone on this roster, except for I believe Al Durham, committed to play basketball for Indiana with Archie Miller as the head coach. So, the good news is you're seeing an upward trajectory with this team. They missed out on the NCAA tournament a couple of years ago. They then went on to lose Romeo Langford and Juwan Morgan, but then saw an improvement in the wins column to 20 last season. They would have made the NCAA tournament had it happened. So I think for this upcoming season, I'm still going to take Archie. But, it's not as obvious as I think people would imagine. Wouldn't you say that?
Yeah, I think that it's easy to get frustrated at Crean, but in his tenure, like when he took over Indiana, it was in a bad way following the Calvin Sampson scandals. Yeah. And he did make the most of his time here. I think Archie Miller is behind that pace. And it is unfortunate that we didn't get to see him in the tournament. There's a way. I'm not a huge fan of his, but he could have proved a lot of people wrong, myself included, if he had a nice run. That said, it should be a clear cut that it should be his team and he should be the one coaching it. Yeah. And I think that if we have a season, and I hope we do, that he can prove you're 100% correct. They've brought the teams in from Indiana, and there's a lot of talent on the roster. He can prove it anytime. And I just beat Wisconsin, please.
Yeah, I think, hey, look, Wisconsin won the Big Ten title last year, so that'd be a heck of an accomplishment. It's funny you mentioned the thing about Archie not making the tournament last year. I think deep down, maybe not even deep down, I think he desperately wanted the chance to prove some people wrong by playing in March Madness last year, but fortunately for him and for IU basketball fans, they didn't get that opportunity. But let's move on to question 2 of Would You Rather, and it involves the Big Ten tournament, which has been really a tournament of nightmares for IU basketball ever since its inception. So I'm going to give you a couple of scenarios, okay, John? Scenario number 1, I say that next year I'll give you that IU wins the Big Ten tournament, but they lose their first NCAA tournament game, okay? That's scenario 1. They win the Big Ten tournament, but they lose their first NCAA tournament game. Scenario 2 is you lose on day 1 of the Big Ten tournament, but you make a run to the Elite 8. Which of those 2 scenarios are you taking, John? Would you rather have scenario 1 or scenario 2?
So I think this is a really interesting question. I think the answer person to person says a lot about how you interpret sports. Like, what's your fandom about?
Yeah.
And I would say it like this. So to me, flags fly forever. And Nathan's wearing a Cubs shirt. We grew up fan, right? Like, there are a lot of seasons that come and go. But when you win, you always have that season. And the Big Ten tournament has been, as Nathan just said eloquently, like a land of nightmares for Indiana basketball. And it's something that, like, it's a gap, right? Indiana basketball, regardless of how long ago it was or wasn't, has had a history of dominance. And this one is a big gaping hole on the resume. And, like, you can lose in the first round of the tournament almost any year. If your opinion is, like, you like the experience, and frankly, like, the Big Ten tournament is like a week long versus multiple weeks in the NCAA tournament, getting to the Elite 8 is really amazing, like, emotional high, and it lasts a while. But, you'll always have lost that game. And it's not that like you can enjoy it for what it is. I don't want to take that away. But the Big Ten tournament has been so bad for so long that I would like to get that demon exercise as an Indiana basketball fan.
Man, I agree with you. I think this says a lot about the type of fan you are, and I think the other type of fan, and I'm gonna root for the other side here. I'm gonna take the Elite Eight run just because Indiana, much like they haven't won the Big Ten tournament, they haven't made the Elite Eight in 18 years. I mean, this has been, the NCAA tournament has been a pain in the butt for IU. Not as much as the Big Ten tournament, but almost as much. With just a handful of Sweet 16 runs here and there. Give me the Elite Eight run. A couple of years ago, this exact same scenario happened to Purdue. They lost to Minnesota in the first game of the Big Ten tournament, but then they got their act together for March Madness and rode it all the way to the Elite Eight. And who knows, with a good bounce here, a favorable tip there, they might have beaten Virginia in that classic Elite Eight game where Carson Edwards went absolutely bonkers. And if you win that game, who knows what happens beyond that. So, in hindsight, I think Purdue fans said that was a great season for us. Similarly, I think if you're telling me next year, if IU loses in the first game of the Big Ten tournament, that's just business as usual. Give me the Elite Eight run. And so I'm it's close for me, but I'm leaning in that direction.
So if you add the stipulation, I think that like you get to the Elite Eight, but we don't know the outcome of that game.
Oh, no.
I would say that might shift it, right?
No. Let's assume a loss. Let's assume a loss in Elite Eight. It could be a fun, crazy game, but assume a loss.
I was rooting for Purdue against Virginia. Virginia's basketball is way too boring. Sorry, guys, if I'm a traitor for that. But at the end of the day, with the Carson Edwards shot was in and out, right? And
that's it.
That's the memory.
Yeah, I know. And of course, I think it was Mamadi Diakite for Virginia who scored at the end of regulation to push that game to overtime, and then Virginia went on to win it all. So yeah, that's a really close one. I wonder what our listeners have to say. Again, guys, let us know your thoughts as you listen to our podcast episode. Now, this next question is pretty straightforward. Would you, if you're running a college basketball program, would you rather have the best incoming recruiting class in the country, or would you rather have the team with the most NBA draft picks at the end of the season? Which side are you leaning on this one?
So when I interpret this question, I think that what comes to mind, frankly, is the question of Romeo Langford versus Victor Oladipo. And I'm going to weigh heavily on the NBA because I understand you can have a lot of hype on a really good recruiting class. And frankly, if you can get those guys to stay for a couple of years, then it's like an elongated high. But when you have a bunch of guys that are leaving to go to the NBA, that means you had a really awesome season, or at least you had really awesome highlights in that season, because not every season with NBA players is going to be the best. But generally you don't have multiple guys going in the draft unlike football, unless you have a material positive outcome. And also, I think that like with Victor Oladipo, he was here for 3 years. We got to watch him bloom. There was, 2.5 awesome seasons with him. So even though, I'm sad it's over because the players are going to the NBA, I think that tells a story about how great their experience was at Indiana basketball.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to put it. Ideally, your basketball program can do both. I think that's what John Calipari keeps trying to do every year at Kentucky.
It would be nice.
Yeah, Coach K at Duke. This is tough for me because one of the important angles here is which of these two makes a bigger difference for your fan base, right? And which of these two makes a bigger impact on future years? Okay, is it more important for, like, if you take the current IU basketball program, what's more important for incoming Hoosiers in 2021, 22, 23? Is it having highly ranked recruiting classes, or is it seeing guys end up in the NBA? And the more I think about it, the more I'm leaning towards the side that you chose. And I'm going to agree with you and say that, yeah, the NBA having guys make it. Oops. All right. Having guys make it to the NBA is a big deal. And, we got some feedback on Twitter earlier tonight from Tom Villier, who said, look, recruits may not work out, but, if you have NBA picks, you're probably having success. And, I'm looking at just teams up and down the list, right? With NBA quality players that end up having really good basketball programs. It works hand in hand. It's not 100% success rate. I'm thinking of, schools like Texas or whatever, where they've had lottery picks, but it's not been the greatest college basketball season for them. You mentioned Romeo Langford. It's not, he ended up being a 5-star recruit and a lottery NBA pick, but at the end of the day, I'm leaning NBA too. It's just, if you're telling me that you have guys good enough to play basketball professionally at the highest rated league in the world, I'm going to take that 10 times out of 10. It's an interesting question, but yeah, I'm leaning NBA. So that's what we've got as far as question 3 goes. Let's ask another what if scenario. I like these a lot. Okay. The next question here is, if you could choose, all right, if you could choose, would you have a sophomore Trayce Jackson-Davis coming up this year? Okay, and TJD had an excellent freshman season. He was recognized by the Big Ten. We don't know what he's going to put up next year. Or would you have guaranteed the sophomore version of Cody Zeller that you saw back in 2012, 2013, where Zeller averaged 16.5 points per game, 8 rebounds per game, 1 steal, over a block per game? Would you take the guaranteed value of Cody Zeller in his sophomore year, or would you take the unknown potential of Trayce Jackson-Davis in year 2?
So I think I'm going to swing a little bit on this and say that TJD's rookie season was really, really good. And his just the ability to play defense at a very high level, 1.8 blocks per game is a pretty good start for a freshman, I would say. I was there in person to watch Cody Zeller play as a sophomore. He was great. And I'm grateful for those memories and that experience. But I want to say that having been there, that was a really big team effort. Zeller was a monumental part of that. He just was justified being drafted very high. And he's gotten paid a lot of money in the NBA. He got a good timing to when he was, coming up and when he got to be a free agent. But at the end of the day, 16, 8, 1-1, it's pretty good. No question about it. I feel like his ceiling was a little higher. And I think within Archie's system, and because it is a more defense-oriented system, having that kind of guy that, 6'9", 6'10", 250 pounds, comes off just as a 19-year-old, can put up 2 blocks a game, that's a pretty appealing roll of the dice, we'll say. And even if you're telling me that there's a 1 in 3 chance that he's better than Zeller, right now I want to roll. I think that the outcome could be really good.
You know what, John? I'm actually going to agree with you once again on this because, like you said, Jackson-Davis 13-8 last year, prolific shot blocker, and next year he's going to come back with NBA draft stock on his mind. And you saw Cody Zeller play his way up to a top 5 selection in the NBA draft. TJD is going to have a lot of those similar dreams. And here's the X factor for me, okay? I remember time and time again at Assembly Hall, getting ready to watch IU battle through another Big Ten game. During shoot-around, Trayce Jackson-Davis would be chucking up threes and hitting a decent percentage of them. If that actually blossoms into something that happens during games where he's taking corner threes or at least developing a mid-range jump shot, I'm taking the unknown potential of Trayce Jackson-Davis over what Cody Zeller gave us a few years ago. Yeah, 16-8, but again, he wasn't a jump shooting threat. If he was, who knows how much higher that team ceiling could have been. I agree with you. I'm taking Trayce Jackson-Davis here, and I'm not sure if I'm not sure if the majority of Hoosier fans will agree. I'm curious to see what they have to say. But the final IU basketball would you rather question we have is one that I really enjoyed getting. It was on the Sideline Report podcast, and they asked us, would you rather have dinner with Branch Mccracken or Bob Knight? And for those of you who may not know who Branch Mccracken is, he was really the first prolific basketball coach, head basketball coach at Indiana. He coached way back from the 30s to the 50s. He won 2 national titles. Would you rather have dinner with him or with the polarizing and popular head basketball coach Bob Knight? So who are you having dinner with, John, tonight? Who are you having dinner with?
So I got to admit, like probably much of the audience, I'm not that familiar with Branch Mccracken, but Nathan gave me a great rundown. And I got to say, maybe it's the moment that we're living in, but it's very clarified right now to me that, people that take risks in a social setting and like really push the ball forward towards, empowering our fellow men, that's something that's noteworthy and special. And I would love to speak with Coach Mccracken about why he was the first to push integration in the Big Ten in a material way. I think that maybe that's because, he's never been alive the same as me. And we've seen, sadly, a lot of sour grapes from Coach Knight. But I do think that it would be an amazing thing to be able to pick his brain even for an hour, Coach Mccracken, about like what went into the considerations for him and why he made the choices that he did.
Yeah, it was back in the 40s when Mccracken brought on Bill Garrett to be the first Black IU basketball player to take the court for the Hoosiers. And like you said, John, in today's context, that would be a pretty newsworthy decision now. And Mccracken made it 80 years ago. So honestly, I would agree for that reason. Also, I'm just concerned that if I have dinner with Bob Knight, he might chuck a chair across the restaurant, and then things.
Yeah, you never know him. That's fucking outside.
He might throw a chair across the restaurant or curse at a waiter or waitress, and then all of a sudden, that's just everyone's gonna drive home, angry and cranky. So yeah, I'm gonna leave.
If you have dinner at Bear's Pizza or whatever, then maybe he doesn't show up because he can't come.
I mean, yeah. No, I think for that reason I'd choose Mccracken. It's just, not only the decision to bring Bill Garrett onto the IU basketball team, but just ask him questions about what college basketball was like back in the 40s, really in its infancy, when you talk about, how popular it is compared to today. I would love to pick his brain a little, especially ask him questions contrasting the game then to the game now. But it's time for a social media shout out. And for those of you who have listened to our podcast on a weekly basis, usually this is something where we talk about a player's Twitter account or player's Instagram account. I'm going to tip my hat to the Pro Football Focus college account. So it's at PFF_college. And they tweeted out a fascinating stat earlier today. Out of the 4 Big Ten quarterbacks who had the lowest turnover-worthy throws, and these are the type of things you hear with Pro Football Focus. They look at every play on film, and they say, okay, out of all the quarterbacks in the Big Ten last year, who made the lowest percentage of throws that could have been a turnover? Could have been picked off, could have been, could have, I guess, yeah, you can't throw a fumble. So really, which of these throws are least worthy of being turnovers? And believe it or not, it's not Justin Fields from Ohio State who led PFF's rankings there. It was Indiana quarterback Michael Pennings. In fact, Pennings had a turnover-worthy throw percentage of less than 2%. So basically, for every 50 throws Michael Pennings made, one potentially had the chance to be a turnover. By the way, Nate Stanley was second. Former Indiana quarterback Peyton Ramsey was third, and Fields was fourth. So that just goes to show you the kind of potential, the kind of expertise that both Pennings and Ramsey showed at quarterback last year. I know IU football fans want the college season to start sometime soon so they can watch Pennings play quarterback next year. And hey, you can watch Ramsey play for Northwestern too. Nothing wrong with that. And that leads us perfectly into the IU football section of our Would You Rather podcast. And it's going to be fun here. We've got a handful of questions. We're going to be going pretty quickly through these. So look, one of the questions, John, that a lot of college football executives and conference commissioners are talking about now are what kind of season are we going to have this year? So let me ask you this. If it's one or the other, would you rather have a guaranteed 10-game season, conference only, starting in the fall, with no fans in the stands, if I can guarantee you the player safety, or would you push the season back in order to play a full 12-game slate and hoping for fans in the stands, which, like you mentioned earlier, leads to dollars for universities?
So I think, I'm going to come down pretty hard on this one.
Yeah.
If we can guarantee a season in any way, you should take it. And then also, like, I'm sorry, guys, you can't go to those games. Like, it's not appropriate behavior at this moment in time. And in particular, like, we've all now been living with 4 or 5 months, Nathan, of no live sports and, cricket, Korean baseball, Taiwanese baseball, EPL, Bundesliga. I get it. We're all in on that stuff. But college football matters a lot to a lot of people in America. And I understand that for the player or the, students that are there right now, and frankly, fans like ourselves, we would love nothing more than the escapism of going to those games. It's just not an appropriate thing. And when you consider the trade-offs of, like, if they could guarantee player safety in a 10-game season, that would be awesome to watch on television. We would all enjoy it on all our virtual Zoom calls with our friends watching on Saturday afternoons. I'll take that 100%. If the uncertainty itself to me is too much.
Yeah. And in fact, I almost think it would be fun, sort of in hindsight. I think it would be I would almost say it's almost justified that, if we look if we fast forward to 2070, it's almost too right to look back on the 2020 college football season as a different one, as a strange one, as one that didn't go on schedule. So for that, I agree with you completely. In fact, I'm going to go this far. If I put myself in the shoes of the Power 5 commissioners or all sorts of college football conference commissioners, I would take the guaranteed 10-game deal in a heartbeat, even if that means no fans in the stands, because guess what that means? That means you get your full share of advertising revenue. You get your full share of television contract money. And these are things that colleges and universities didn't get in the final couple months of the school year this past spring. So if I'm putting myself in their shoes, I absolutely take this 10-game deal. And, in our hypothetical, we're saying we can guarantee player safety and player health, which we can't. I mean, that's just impossible to ensure at this point. But yeah, if I put myself in their position, I would absolutely take the 10-game slate. Don't push your luck. Take what you can, and then try again in 2021. So let's move on to a Big Ten specific question. This is not really on people's minds right now. Conference realignment, expansion, contraction, whatever. But just for kicks, would you rather have the Big Ten expand and add a couple of teams, specifically Cincinnati and Iowa State? Or would you contract, maybe increase the quality of the conference rather than the quantity of teams by eliminating Rutgers and Nebraska? And I just want to let the people know, Nebraska was kind of a tough choice. I wanted to keep it an even number, so that's why Nebraska was the odd team out. So would you rather add Cincinnati, Iowa State, or kick out Rutgers, Nebraska?
So as Nathan knows, as a really long-term, lifelong friend, I'm more of a basketball guy than a college football guy. I think it's very interesting the teams he chose, and it makes sense because those are very strong historically teams across, Cincy has a great record, and so does ISU in terms of making the tournament and deep runs. ISU is a Bombers team. Like, all they do is shoot 3-pointers, and Cincinnati plays like this boring, grinded out defense. So it's really interesting to have that as the potential, like, different sauces in the Big Ten pool. I can't really speak to their football teams. I think Cincinnati is a pretty decent football team. I don't know about Iowa State. And I don't think that it makes sense necessarily to contract. I understand that Nebraska doesn't really have like the rivalries down per se, like maybe with Iowa, and they seem kind of a little oddball. I know a lot of people have like strong feelings on Rutgers being mediocre, but I do think that adding more adds more flavor than subtracting does, adding the quality. And then you can really like know when your coach has to go and he loses to Rutgers, like our guy a couple times.
Yeah, that's always – I guess that's true. Once Rutgers is brought into the Big Ten, all of a sudden if your football coach or your basketball coach loses to them, I guess outside of last year where Rutgers was actually a very competitive basketball team, you go, oh, God, that's, red flag.
As an Indiana guy, Rutgers entering coincided with IU football getting out of the basement. So it's good to have another one. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, yeah, and another one. I mean, the sad part is, like, I'm not going to get into this for more than a second, but Rutgers football was pretty good up until they came into the Big Ten. They had quality players and they had weeks of top 25 rankings. For whatever reason, they've just bottomed out here in the last, decade or so. I'm gonna cut Rutgers and Nebraska out of the Big Ten. To me, the Big Ten's brand is sort of this Midwestern, centrally geographic conference, and Rutgers and Nebraska. Rutgers is way out near New York City.
Can we propose a trade? Where we trade Nebraska and Rutgers and get ISU and Cincy?
Man, I think if the Big Ten could pull that trade off, the commissioner Kevin Warren deserves a little side money, because wow, that would be a huge coup for the Big Ten. But since we're not making a trade, I'm gonna say cut Rutgers and Nebraska, and Nebraska. I'm fine with keeping them in the conference if you want to keep 13 teams, but I'm just sick of Rutgers. Like, What are we doing with having? What are we doing with
access to New York City's television market?
I mean, is it really worth it? Maybe I'll change my mind if I see some sort of evidence on that. But I can't help but think the product of the Big Ten in football and really basketball too, up until last year. And by the way, other sports too. If you look at even the Olympic sports like volleyball and soccer and things like that, Rutgers is bringing up the rear there too. They got a solid women's basketball program. They're solid in a few other sports as well. But man, like, it's really diluted the quality of the Big Ten, adding Rutgers specifically. So if you can narrow things down a little bit, condense it, and I'm sure Rutgers and Nebraska can find homes somewhere else, some other conference, the Big East or the Big 12, like things used to be. Give me that. I'm sick and tired of Rutgers. All right, let's move on. Okay, so Michael Pennings, we talked about him in the Pro Football Focus article a few minutes ago. The big question with Pennings every single year so far, in the 3 years he's been at IU, is can he stay healthy? Excuse me, the 2 years he's been at IU so far, can he stay healthy? Well, I'm going to ask you this, John. If I can guarantee you a healthy Michael Pennings for the entire season, but you lose the bucket game to Purdue, do you choose that scenario? Or Michael Pennings may be healthy. He may not be healthy. Who knows what'll happen? We're just going to have to let it play itself out. But Indiana starts this upcoming football season 1-0 with a win at Wisconsin. So scenario one, Pennings stays healthy, but you lose to Purdue. Scenario two, Pennings, not sure, but you start off the season with a win at Wisconsin. What are you taking?
So I have competing interests with this question because we've seen seasons go on with Pennings out or in and out, and they've done pretty well, right? Yeah. It's some of the best football we've seen, in a while. But I think I got to go with a healthy Pennings and a loss to Purdue.
Okay.
as much as like I really would like Indiana to always beat Wisconsin, they're so boring, and like everyone on their football team is the same, and everyone on their basketball team is the same too. But at the end of the day, like we can lose the Oak Bucket, and that sucks, and I hate it, just like everyone else listening. But Indiana really needs to win a postseason game, and I think the odds of that, if you give me a loss the last game of the season with Purdue, but Pennings healthy throughout, I'm going to take my chances and say, like, we're going to win enough to get a good bowl game. We're going to win that bowl game with him healthy throughout the season.
Yeah, this is interesting to me. I'm rolling the dice here. I'm saying give me the season opening win at Wisconsin. I'm saying give me the season opening win at Wisconsin. Let's start 1-0. Let's drum up the hype train in Bloomington. And hey, Michael Penix, look, rumor has it he's put in some work in the offseason, building some muscle. I know the backup quarterback situation is very shaky right now with Peyton Ramsey off to Northwestern, but let's have some fun. Hey, this doesn't guarantee Penix gets injured. Maybe he finds a way to stay healthy, slides a little bit more, protects himself a little bit more. Let's roll the dice. I'm taking the question mark with Penix's health, but give me that season opening win at Wisconsin. Hey, it would be pretty cool to see IU football in the headlines, if not for a night, but for a week. That would be pretty fun without a question.
The one thing that would have changed this for me, because I was on the fence really hard, but because Wisconsin is the West versus the East part of the Big Ten, if you had given me like a Michigan or certainly Ohio State, right, I 100% changes the equation because of the math in the conference scheduling.
Yep.
And I do think that it hurts the case. Well, I was 51-49. I think that Wisconsin being in the other half of the conference does make it a little bit less valuable. Like, it would be very satisfying. But if it was also that Ohio State is now down one on those standings that matters so much, I think that's a huge difference.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. And there's a reason that's the reason why it was Wisconsin and not one of the Big Ten East teams. I guess, yeah. I'm just envisioning, right? If the season goes off, as expected here, Indiana starts the season, primetime game in Madison, goes in there, beats the Badgers, and hey, maybe maybe Michael Penix stays healthy, and if he does, Indiana all of a sudden could be a team to look out for. I'm gonna wrap up our Would You Rather episode with this final question. We threw this out in poll version over on our Indiana HQ Twitter account. We've already had over 100 votes on this question since this poll was released a couple of hours ago. So if you haven't voted yet, go right now and do so. The final Would You Rather question tonight is this. If you're running a college football program, would you rather have a great quarterback with a bad defense or a lousy QB with a great defense? Which side are you taking on this?
So Nathan and I have some interesting insight, I think, since both of us grew up in Chicagoland and got to watch the Bears, and we went to Indiana. Indiana has always had a above average for Indiana football quarterback. The offense typically is pretty good. And the Bears are the opposite, where like they routinely have phenomenal defenses and atrocious to mediocre quarterbacks. I understand that it's a little different. If you do have a dominant defense in college football, you can eke out more wins than I think in the NFL, even with the lousy quarterback. But count me on the side that like watching 13-10 is really boring. So like I'm a true Indiana fan. Watching a 45-42 loss at least gives you like 2 hours of them throwing bombs, on the out route and them catching it, as opposed to like slug it out for 3 yards a carry is maybe not as appealing.
Man, I have Chicago Bears football in my blood, really. And the problem is I have seen way too many Bears teams play competitive football, even with atrocious quarterbacks. By the way, the current one, not somebody to get all excited about. I'm kind of torn on this.
It's really hard.
Yeah, and it's funny when you look at the results of our poll right now, it's 51-49. 51% of our voters are choosing the great quarterback with the bad defense. So they agree, a little bit over half of our voters agree with you. I'm going to go the other way. Look, the way I think about it is if you have a great defense, let me think, like if you're in the Big 10 or the Big 12 or the SEC, got a great defense, all right, you're going to keep yourself in the game, right? You're going to keep yourself in the game. It's going to be a close contest. If you can run the ball, if you can run the ball, be a little creative offensively, heck, if you can make some of your kicks, I think I'm going to take that side. I mean, both of these kind of make me want to throw up in my mouth a little bit. But in all seriousness, if I had to choose one, give me the defense. I'll hire a fun offensive coordinator who's creative and innovative, and we'll go from there.
I do think that, like I said, the odds of winning are higher in the college game if you have a truly elite defense. And I think it matters in terms of, like, if you're trying to win the most games, that, like, in football, special teams and defense can score points, unlike, say, baseball. And so you can create a series of if you need 21 points to win, that's actually not that high of a barrier. And, like, if you need 45 points to win, it's a different story, no matter if you've got, like, Tom Brady or not. But I think that the quality of the entertainment suffers potentially.
Oh yeah, no, there's I totally agree with that. I ideally you have both a great QB and a great defense. But hey, look, that about wraps it up for our 151st show of the Hoosier Sound. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate all of your support. Thank you to our live audience. You guys are all welcome every single week. To hear more fantastic podcast episodes like the one you heard today, be sure to follow us on the Hoosier Sound. And while that Twitter account is still suspended, you can go over and follow us at Indiana HQ to make sure you don't miss any episodes in the future. You can also go to our website, indianahq.com, to find it all in one place. Lastly, if you liked our show, leave us a review, tell a friend, share our links. Your support really helps us grow this podcast, and feel free to shoot us a message over on Facebook or Twitter. But as always, thank you for listening, Hoosier Nation, and we'll see you next time.